we remember we're going through the book of Deuteronomy, right? And we talked about this from week in and week out. That this is Moses giving of the law, and the law was really the way that the people of God should act. They should act in response to who God is. They should act in response to the character of God. They should act and live out their life in a godly manner, which would be vastly different from the nations that are surrounding them. And so Moses is giving them this charge and this challenge of how they should be living out their lives. And again, this lifestyle, as they move into the promised land, will look radically different from those nations that are around them. And I say that as we start out, that this isn't just a history lesson of how they should live. The principles are still transferable of how we should live as Christ followers in a nation that surrounds us that is vastly different from how we operate. Is that clear? So, and then we'll see here, it's a number of just kind of seemingly random, if you will, miscellaneous laws we're going to go through. But there are some common threads I want to make sure that we have attention to before we get started. And that is that many of these laws were put in place to protect those who are vulnerable and those who were kind of the underprivileged of society. And so as we're going through this set of scriptures, there is a common theme in that regard. And that is to make sure that we protect the rights of the individuals, and specifically those who are more vulnerable. We'll just put it that way, right? So as we move into this first law, or this first point, if you read ahead, you know what's coming. So as we go through this first law, I kind of liken it akin to this. We're going to put on our hiking shoes for a little while. And we're going to hike through literally 4 verses, 2 sentences for most of our time. We're then going to take off our hiking shoes and literally put on track shoes, and we are going to sprint for the rest of the 40 minutes to get through all the material. Got where we're going? All right. Here we go. Come on. Jeff does this so much better. Oh, there we go. All right, Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. And again, as we go through this, this law is very specific to a case specific. This isn't an overarching law to divorce and remarriage. It's very specific. Here we go. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs of his house, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter man dies who took her to be his wife, then the former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. First sentence. And you shall not bring upon the land that the Lord your God has given you an inheritance, this abomination. All right, so we're starting out in this chapter, and Moses is being very specific on some rules and regulations for divorce and remarriage. And this one is very specific in regards to what is taking place here. The reality is there's a man, and he found some indecency with his wife. Right? And the one thing that's just interesting is when we look at that in the original language, it's very vague what that means, some indecency. And the reality is in the Hebrew, it literally means nakedness of thing, which really doesn't help clarify what that means. And so as the time would come out of this and time would progress to the time of Jesus, there became 2 schools of thought. One was this indecency had to do with adultery, and that's what it meant. But there was another camp that was much more liberal that was, no, you can divorce your wife for any willy-nilly thing. If she cooks lousy, if she cleans lousy, if she sews lousy, if whatever it is, and you find it unpleasing, you can write her a certificate of divorce. And so we had one side that was on the one side of adultery and specific to more of a sexual issue, and on the other side, just like at the whim of the husband. Because at the time, it was at the whim of the husband. He could just dictate what he wanted, and the woman had no rights, right? A vulnerable person that didn't have rights. And so what Moses is saying, 2 things here. One is to protect the wife from being traded around like property or being treated very inappropriately, she would have this certificate of divorce that would allow her then to remarry and keep her dignity. The language here is very specific against the man. For if the prohibition is against the man to come back after a second remarriage and say, hey, you know what? I'd like to take you back. And that's what God says is an abomination. You see, the reality is when he would go through the first husband, the divorce the first time around, that was drawn out, it was legal, and it was there for a reason for the husband to maybe turn his mind around and change his mind to come back and have reconciliation. But once it was done, and then he let her go, and now she remarries. And either she gets re-divorced or the man dies. The prohibition is against the first husband to come back and remarry her. And the reality is, if you thought something was indecent about her the first time, whether she dressed inappropriate, she was too flirtatious, whatever it was, because we covered 2 weeks ago the chapter that if it was adultery, what was the penalty for adultery? You'd stone her. Or if you, on your honeymoon night, found out she wasn't a virgin, what would you do? Stone her. So we already know what the penalty was for adultery. So somewhere in between those two things, she might have done something. But this law is put in place to protect her from just being traded around. And it's also a way of saying to the husband that's just treating her poorly, shame on you. And if you think you want her back after that, after now she has been with a husband, another husband, like really, what did you find indecent the first time that now this is acceptable? And so it's a prohibition against the husband, very specific to this case of divorce and remarriage. Are you with me? So as I studied that and I prayed about that and I read through so many commentaries, they pretty much all agreed on that. But as I was praying about that, there was one other commentary that I had memorized that came to my mind. Now, I don't normally memorize commentaries, but see, this commentary is actually in the Bible. And so some number of years after this, Jesus would speak to the same issue. And here we go. In Matthew 19:3, the Pharisees came up to him to test him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? So here they were camping on the liberal side for any willy-nilly reason. Like, if my wife just can't cook, can I get her out of the house? And that's what they're asking. But they're asking not really to figure out what does this law really mean. They're trying to test and to tempt him into saying an answer that they could get him into trouble with. And so their heart, their purpose isn't for understanding truth, it's for trapping him in his comments. And so that's their purpose for asking the question. And I don't know if they're trying to get him to speak against Moses, or at the time there was a very high-profile divorce and remarriage that was going on that actually cost John the Baptist his life. King Herod had gotten his brother-in-law to get divorced to his then-wife and then remarried that wife, and John the Baptist spoke against that, saying, that is unlawful, and he got his head chopped off. And so that's in the background as the Pharisees are coming. They want to get rid of Jesus one way or the other. And their heart shows they're there to trap him. And so they come up and they ask, hey, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? And he answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And he said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast, be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two flesh, but one. And therefore what God has joined together, let man not separate. Right? So this is God's design for marriage from the beginning. And we've been talking about that the whole time in Deuteronomy. The bar is set high. God's standards are set high. The ideal of marriage is set high. And so Jesus is taking them back. He's like, no, you know what? You're starting the discussion off with the wrong question. Let's reset it and recalibrate it to what was said in the beginning. Here's the reality about marriage. This is God's design. And he brings it up to that level. And so they continue on. We say, well, if that's the case, then why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and send her on her way? So they're quoting this verse in Deuteronomy. And Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning, it was not so. And this hardness of heart, this is the commentary that I believe is set for the whole of the 2 chapters we're looking at today, because it's the reality of the hardness of our heart that we act out. It was the hardness of the heart of the husband of why he was kicking his wife out of the house. And Jesus said, that's why this happens. It's because it's a heart issue. It's a heart issue. All of sin ultimately becomes a heart issue. You see, you want to know the reason to the answer of why there's divorce? He's telling them, you know what? It's a matter of the heart. He reschools them to the beginning design, and he said, here's the issue. It's a heart issue. And he goes on to say, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And so he finally answers the question. Is it the willy-nilly camp that her food kind of stinks, or is it a little bit more serious? He said, no, it's that serious side, and it's very specific. But the reality is it comes down to the heart. You know, in our culture today, the man isn't the dominant one. He's not the one that's in control. We have a culture where men and women can issue for the divorce, right? And so what it comes down to still the heart. And you think about that. It's the heart that causes us to go astray. It's the heart that causes us to be hardened to our spouse. It's the heart that causes us to stop loving. They're issues of the heart. And Jesus is just trying to get them to see the truth of the matter. You know, our hearts wander. Our hearts get hardened. They lack forgiveness. We believe in lies. We follow the things of the world and not the things of the Word. We forget to forgive, and we lose sight that the two became one, and we get focused on the one, all right, me. And it's self-centered. And if you're not meeting my needs or what I think my needs are, then I'm out of here or you're out of here. Right? Doesn't that sound a little bit familiar of what we've heard? And maybe we've been through some of those things ourselves. You know, as I was thinking about that, especially in lieu of Valentine's weekend, I go back to something that Jeff talked about 2 weeks ago. He brought up the scenario of the women caught in adultery when we were looking at that subject matter. Right? And you remember the story. They set him up in a trap and brought up this woman who was caught in adultery, and they said, hey, what does the law say? Should we stone her? That's indeed what it said in that chapter. And he bends down to write in the sand, remember that? And he stands up, okay, here's the deal. Whoever is without the first sin, you cast the first stone. And he goes back to writing, and he looks up, and they're all gone. He says, woman, where are those who condemn you? He said, they've left. He says, well, neither do I condemn you, and go and do this no more. And so the reality is he's confronting the woman with truth, but he's also showing her grace and mercy. He just, you know what, don't do that anymore. It's hurtful. It harms you, it harms the other person. But that's not the way people of God are supposed to act. Don't do it anymore. But I don't condemn you. It's grace and mercy. You know, as I thought about that further, I thought about another situation, the story of David and Bathsheba. Are you familiar with that? When it was the season that kings would go to war, it's kind of like football season was starting, for some reason David stayed behind. It was a contract dispute or what it was, but all the kings went out to war, and he stayed home. And one day he was on top of his roof, King David, from his roof, and he saw a beautiful woman out there, Bathsheba. Whew, hot. I want her. So she had her brought over to the house. She was married to one of his guys in the army who was out playing battlefield. And he laid with her and he got her pregnant, and then he knew he was in trouble. So he sent for Uriah the Hittite to come. And he thought, maybe if I could have him sleep with his wife, then it could just pretend like that's his and I can be done away with it. But because when he came home, he said, hey, my team members aren't getting this privilege, neither will I. And he slept outside the door, and he went back to war. David sent him with a note and said, hey, put this guy in the front line. And he died. And after he died, he took Bathsheba to be his wife. So here you have a guy who committed conspiracy to commit murder and adultery. And what is it true about the saying of David? David was a man after God's own heart. Really? That's how a man after God's own heart? Because Nathan the prophet came and confronted him. And he said, hey, you know what? There's a man who has a ton of sheep, and he's rich. And there's one guy who has a little lamb. He has one. And the guy with the many came and stole the one lamb from him. What should we do? And King David said, kill the guy. And he realized, oh, wait, that's me. And he put on ashes, and he put on sackcloth, and he mourned because he knew he blew it. And then after that child died, then he took off his clothes, and he just went back. And he actually brought Bathsheba into his house to be his bride. You know who their next son was? Solomon, the most wise king ever, the lineage that Jesus would come through. And I thought about that. If there isn't grace in the story of the Bible when we make mistakes, then I don't know why we're here. Do you hear me? The bar is high, and we make mistakes all the time. But that grace of God, getting what we don't deserve, that mercy, getting what we don't deserve, and the mercy of God, not getting what we do deserve, is tremendous. And that gets us back up to that bar, that it's a matter of the heart. And God's grace is sufficient for us. And as I thought about that, another verse came to mind that I have memorized, and I'm trying to become an ESV guy with y'all. After 47 years of NIV translation, I have this memorized in the NIV. Proverbs 4:23, that above all else, like your number one thing, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. No matter what you do, above everything, guard your heart, because it's the wellspring of life. And I think about that, like guarding your heart isn't something passive. That's something that's active, right? If we're in a military situation, would you want to come up to a camp that's being guarded by people who are sleeping? No, you need them wide awake and fully armed. So how do we do that? We continue in prayer. We spend time in God's word. We practice forgiveness. Forgiveness from the heart. We love one another. We put his commands into practice. We're obedient. And we show mercy and grace to those because we have been shown mercy and grace. And we guard our hearts because how we act with other people is a matter of the heart. And so right now we're going to stop and take off our hiking shoes, and we're going to put on our track shoes, and we're going to run through 2 chapters in about 20 minutes. But as we change our shoes, so to speak, I want to stop and just pray for a moment before we leave the subject. Because I know the reality of numbers and statistics means that some of us in this room have maybe had to deal with firsthand experience of divorce and maybe remarriage. And I want to make sure we don't leave this space knowing that grace is in place. Father, I thank you for each person in this room. And God, you know where we are in our marriages, outside of our marriages, before marriage, whatever the scenario is, you know us full well and you love us. And God, I pray that we would hear a voice that's not condemning us, but one that is speaking truth and grace and challenging us to live the standards that you have set for us. And God, I thank you for giving us grace and mercy when we blow it in whatever area. Lord, I just pray a blessing over each married person here and for those who are looking into marriage at some point, that they would follow you in the example of your love and your requirements and standards, and bless them in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, track shoes are on. Here we go. Verse 5, back to Deuteronomy. When a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be liable for any other public duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with his wife whom he has taken. And it's interesting, in the NIV it says to bring happiness to his wife. And as I was looking at that, I thought, maybe this is where the whole idea of the honey-do list comes from. There you go, you can laugh. It was supposed to be funny, right? Just kidding, right? But if you look at it, here's this command in stark contrast to what we just looked at. I dare bet in a marriage scenario that if you spent time understanding what brings joy to the home and to your spouse, and that we actively engage in that principle, then the reality or the chances of our hearts being hardened probably go down a tremendous amount. And so I think Moses put this law here specifically saying, hey, you get a honeymoon year, like have fun. It's meant to be fun. And oh, by the way, start off your year of your marriage with happiness and figure out, talk about it, have fun together, but figure out how to bring joy into your marriage. And don't stop after that first year, keep it going. And so I think he puts that law there right after that as a way to kind of counterbalance what he just talked about. No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. All right, so here now we're going to have these random just laws, right? Again, there's a common theme about protecting the vulnerable person. So what is this saying? If you're taking collateral for a loan or a pledge, like don't take what's critical for their life. This person doesn't have a lot to begin with. He doesn't have a storeroom. He has to use this to hand grind grain into wheat every day. And if he's depending on that tool to live, don't take that as a pledge for collateral for the loan. It'd be like today, if you took a loan from somebody and maybe they make their livelihood as a carpenter. And you're like, I know what you have the most thing that is the most valuable are your tools. I'm going to take your tools from you. Like, that's crazy. Why? You can't take what's going to bring the guy a livelihood to pay you back or to sustain his family. And so that's what Moses is saying here. Just be wise with what you take for a pledge. And don't be overbearing. If a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel, and if he treats him as a slave or sells them, then that thief shall die. So shall you purge the evil from your midst. He's talking about kidnapping here, this idea of stealing. And oh, by the way, back in October, didn't we go through, I vaguely remember something, thou shalt not steal. That's what the same word that's taking place here, to steal someone's freedom. Right? We're going through life and you're a free person. You have something that's significant. I have no right to steal your freedom, to kidnap you. You know, interestingly enough, that based on a 2007 statistics sheet, an estimated 2.5 million people are in forced labor, including sexual exploitation, today at any given time a result of trafficking. Have we really gotten that far since this command? 2.5 million any given day have been stolen, have been kidnapped for whatever reason. In this one, Moses is saying, you know what? It's someone's freedom. You have no right to steal someone's freedom. Take care in cases of leprosy and leprous disease, to be careful to do according to all that the Levitical priest shall direct you. And as I command them, so you should be careful to do. And remember the Lord your God, what he did to Miriam on the way out of Egypt. And so this isn't leprosy like we know leprosy. This is just a generic term for skin disease, right? But what would happen? They knew already from Leviticus, from the law that was given, or the information was given previously, on how to treat this scenario. And it's interesting, he doesn't have them go to the doctor. He has them go to the Levitical priests to get taken care of. Why? They would come and show their condition, and then they would prescribe the recommendation. Oftentimes, you would be set out of camp for a week. As you go through the treatment, you would come back to the priest and show yourself, and if you're healed, you're allowed back into community. If you're not, you go back out for another week, and we go through the next round of treatment. But sometimes, as is in the case here, God would use this as divine punishment. You see, when they were first coming out of Egypt, Moses and Aaron and Miriam were leading the crowds. And for some reason, Aaron and Miriam decided that Moses really wasn't all that. And why does he get to be the main spokesperson? And then grumbled about Moses and his leadership, and God put leprosy on her skin. And then they realized that was in result of their sin, and they came forth and they just pled for mercy. And so she was put out for a week, and then she was healed. Moses prayed for her, and she was brought back into community. Right, so God is serious about dealing with our sin and dealing with purity, and we looked at that last week. When you make your neighbor a loan of any sort, you should not go into his house to collect his pledge. You shall stand outside the house, and the man to whom you make the loan shall bring the pledge out to you, the collateral. And if he is a poor man, you shall not sleep in his pledge. You shall restore to him the pledge as the sun sets, that he may sleep in his cloak and bless you. And that should be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. So in this specific case, the presupposition is the collateral for the loan is a cloak. And the people would wear that cloak and they would sleep in that cloak. If you were poor, you didn't have more than one cloak, and you certainly didn't have blankets. And so the underlying principle here is to deal with poor people is to protect their dignity. Don't go into their house because you may see how poor they really are, and it might affect your heart. You know what? Protect his dignity. Let him go into the house and figure out what he has for collateral and bring it out to you and present it. And I've been around the world. I've been in homes in India. I've been in homes in Africa. I've been in homes in Cuba and places in Latin America. And I have been in homes of very poor people. But I came in and I protected my heart and just loved them with dignity. Because you know why? They're created in the image of God just like I am. And far be it from me to have any judgment, attitude, and class upon me versus a poor person. And so Moses is saying, hey, they protect their dignity. Right? That's something they can have. And not only protect it, but empower and encourage them in their dignity. Right? And don't oppress a poor person. And so he's making that clear to them here. He goes on to say, you should not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who is in your land within your towns. You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and he counts on it, lest he cry out against you to the Lord and you be guilty of sin. Right? So empower, not oppress people. And if he's poor and it demands for payment for the day's labor, give him his pay. Why? Because he's counting on that. He's going to feed himself. He's got to feed and clothe his family and take care of his household. He needs the legitimate pay of his work for that day. And oh, by the way, if you don't do that, he has a hotline to the foreman who is God, and you don't want to mess with that foreman when he shows up and wonders why you haven't paid the guy. And so the poor, protect them. Protect the poor. I thought we should say this next one until Father's Day, but then Jeff told me we don't do certain Father's Day services, so we'll cover it now. Happy Father's Day. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children. I hear an amen? Come on. Nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for their own sin. How liberating is that? Right? There are some circumstances where there's corporate sin, and we've talked about that in a number of chapters before today, that if there is a segment of the community that are engaging in the same sin, then Jesus or God said through Moses, right, hey, just wipe them all out. Like their heart is wicked, just, off with their heads, out of here, stone them, get rid of them. But here, it's the law is being set up for individual responsibility. That if there's something I'm doing that's wrong, I am held liable to my own actions. It's not somebody else. I'm not taking them to court to kind of get the punishment off to somebody else. I got to stand up and deal with my own issues. And oh, by the way, so do my children for their own stuff. And that's what Moses is saying here. He's talking about individual responsibility versus corporate responsibility. It says, you should not pervert the justice due the sojourner or the fatherless or take the widow's garment in pledge, but you should remember that you were a slave in Egypt as well, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this. And right, so he's setting up this protected class, right? The foreigner, the child, the woman, the wife, the widow. Right? Women and children first. And to give them a break. That mercy and justice were due to them as well. Because why? Well, you were once under that same situation before, and how did it feel? So remember your experiences of what you've gone through and treat people like I treated you. When you cried out to me, did I not save you? Did I not bring you out of Egypt where they were harsh with you? And he's saying, have you not learned your lesson? And I don't know if you've been to foreign countries, like, I'll just take that one as an example. When you're a foreigner in a foreign land and you don't know the language, like I'm semi-good when I go to Latin countries because I can understand the language, especially if I have my translators with me in Cuba. But I remember the first time when I worked for Hewlett-Packard and I went to Germany on my very first business trip to Europe to a non-Hispanic speaker or Latin-speaking country, and I show up in these signs, I'm like, what in the world does that mean? And I was dependent on the locals to help me out. And as I'm driving down the freeway, I'm looking at the sign, it says asphalt. And I'm like, what? And it means way out in German. I didn't know that. I thought it was a very rude sign. I'm like, oh my goodness. And I showed up on the side of the road looking for directions. I'm like, and I found someone that was bilingual. I'm like, what does this sign mean? I'm like, it means way out. Not like, well, you're way out of here, but like how to get off the freeway. I'm like, oh, good. So how many of these exits do I got to take until I find my hotel? Right? But I was dependent on that person. I was a foreigner in a foreign land, and I needed help. And then, I'm just grateful that the guy I asked for directions decided not to, play a funny one on me. Yeah. 3 more, exits down the road. Right? He says, hey, remember, you were in that place. You've been there. You remember what it's like? You don't treat people like that. The next section we actually covered not too long ago about leaving a harvest, or double harvest, not to do that. So we're going to skip that, and now we're in chapter 25. Chapter 25, verse 1. If there is a dispute between men, and they come into court, and the judges decide between them, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty, then if the guilty man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall shall cause him to lie down and be beaten in the presence with a number of stripes in proportion to his offense. 40 stripes may be given him, but not more, or lest if one should go on to beat him with more stripes than these, your brother be degraded in your sight. So remember, we talked about the fact there weren't jails during this time. They didn't have prisons. It was pretty much, divine retribution at the moment, or now we're talking about here, penalty for your crime. But even in that, Moses is being specific and being careful to set up some boundaries. Why? Not to degrade the person, not to have inhumane ways of chastising people who are in the wrong. So even those who are guilty, there's some parameters set to protect the guilty party. And so Moses is trying to make that clear to them. He said, hey, you know what? They deserve to be punished, but don't do it in an inhumane way. Right? Their sin deserves punishment, but let's keep it at that. Verse 4, Jeff dealt with as well, so we'll move into Jeff 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man should not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in to her and take her to be his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed the name of his dead brother, so the name may not be blotted out of Israel. And if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him, and if he persists, saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull off his sandal off of his foot, spit in his face. And she shall also say to him, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandals pulled off, all the days of his life. What? What does this mean, right? So, it's a significant law. This is actually hearkening back to the covenant with God and Abraham. And he said, I will give you a people so numerous you can't count. I'm going to give you a land that is yours, that is a blessing, and I will bless your name. I'm going to do this to you. You don't have anything to do about that. It's just one way unilateral blessing. I'm going to do it to you. The Abrahamic covenant. This is going back to that because as they come into the promised land, or they're getting ready to now, the idea of land and name is huge in this context. And so if you were in a situation as you were a wife and your husband died, but you did not yet have a son to carry on the name and the lineage, then the rule was that you would go to that man's brother and become his wife and perpetuate the line. And your first son would take on the name of the dead husband, and you perpetuate that line on through and through. And so for you, husband, not to live up to this law was a disgrace. And it was such a disgrace against the commands of God, you had to live with this shame about your household for the rest of your life. Because sandals denoted dignity, that you belonged, so to have one sandal missing and, literally or figuratively walking around, hey, where's your sandal? They knew exactly. Oh, hey, you're a schmuck. You didn't live up to your end of the bargain. I know what you did. And you had to live with that. Why? Because it was so significant to take care of family. There's a story in the Bible of a gal named Ruth who found herself in the same situation. And there was a guy by the name of Boaz. And she went up to him and said, hey, you know what? You're a kinsman redeemer. You're a guy that can help take care of this because I need to perpetuate the name of my husband. And he said, actually, you know what? I'm your second closest relative, not your first, but I will take you. But first, let me go make a deal with him. If he doesn't want you, I will take you. And that's really what happened in that story. He steps up and says, hey, did you know that there's a scenario and this is what's going on? And the husband, or the would-be husband, said, oh, yeah, I'll do it. He said, well, by the way, then, remember, he'll take on the name of the husband and he'll get this portion. And then the guy thought, wait, that might encroach upon my inheritance to my son. So you know what? No, here's my sandal. You can have her. And Boaz married her. And who is Boaz? He's the great-grandfather of King David. Why? Because they were serious about putting this law into practice. All right, you ready for a curveball? When men fight with one another, and the wife of the one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of the one who's giving him the beatdown, and puts out her hand and seizes him by the private parts, hey, I didn't write this, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eyes shall have no pity. Really, your eyes should have no pity. I think your hand should have no pity, right? So you cut her off her hand. Are you serious? What is this? Jeff gives me this on vacation, right? But it's very significant, right? Two things going on. One is, at all costs, we're trying to protect the dignity of the woman, right? In other words, there's no business to be put in your hand where it doesn't belong, all right? Regardless of the fact. Let the man take it, let him take his beat down. But there's something more significant going on, right? What did we just talk about? Perpetuating the family line. That if you were to do that in a manner that would be decapitating, right, then it would stop the line. And they're that serious about people and place and name and lineage and the dignity of the woman. You know what? Let them fight and just let it be. Here's where I come to on that. The bar for God's standard is up here. And by the way, don't hit below the belt, right? If we went through life living up to God's standards that are up here and not hitting below the belt, we'd be doing pretty good. And I think if we live that out as a lifestyle, I think people would respect and say, hey, you know what? There's something different about him. There's something different about her, how they live their life, that they have a high bar of integrity and they shoot for it and they don't hit below the belt. And that's really what's going on in these two chapters that we're covering. I mean, God is showing us how to live a life that reflects his character. He says, oh, by the way, this is beneficial for you. And the things I'm commanding for you to do and not do, I'm serious about. Because it's how I treat you. You should not have in your bag two kinds of weights, a large and a small. You should not have in your house two kinds of measure, a large and a small. A full and fair weight you shall have, and a full and fair measure you shall have. That all the days of your life, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God has given you. For all who do such things and all who act dishonestly are an abomination to the Lord your God. Right? So, fair business standards. Don't cheat people. Right? If it's the cost is what it is, charge it to them. You know, don't look for illegal gain. Don't look to cheat somebody out of money, out of a business deal. Right? Those are matters of the heart. Greed is a matter of the heart. How we treat people is a matter of the heart. And so he's talking about that here. Be fair in your business dealings. When I worked for Hewlett Packard, there was a story that was true and then became legend. This HP sales rep went on a trip to Texas. In order to fit into the culture, he bought a very expensive cowboy hat. And when he got back to the office, he filled out his expense report, and he put the hat on the report and gave it to his manager. Well, his manager picked up the report and started to go through that and said, wait a minute. You can't expense a cowboy hat. So the sales rep took the expense report, went back and recalculated things and so forth, and put it back on the manager's desk and said, there, find the hat, and walked away. Really? That's ethical business? Internal business, external business? Really? That's the way we're supposed to act? No, be fair with one another in your business dealings. And finally, remember what Amalek did to you on your way as you came out of Egypt. How he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary and cut off your tail. And those who were lagging behind you, for he did not fear God. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around you in the land that the Lord your God has given you for an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. So here was a people that they came across early on. These people, the Amalekites, did not show them kindness. In fact, they kind of went after the laggards and those who were a little bit slower in the race and just wiped them out. And he said, you know what? Because they didn't fear God, when you're in and settled, go back and finish them off, period. And God is ruthless with sin. In the same way, he's gracious to us as well. Right? The bar that God sets as a standard for our life is high. And the grace is sufficient for us to get us up to that bar. And oh, by the way, when we do deserve judgment, he gives us mercy. Right? Grace is getting what we don't deserve, and mercy is not getting what we do deserve. And God loves us so. And he shows it through those two things. He says, oh, by the way, then, remember as you go about your life, there are those who are in tough situations. There's the poor, there's the widow, there's the orphan, those who are being oppressed. Love them. Bring freedom to them. Help them out. Equip them and empower them. And make sure you show them that they are worthwhile. They're worth the Son of God, and give them dignity. You know, that's how God treated us. I mean, he sent his Son, which we have communion every week. And what did the Son do? He showed us the very love and mercy of God. For when we couldn't make it on our own, he gave us the grace of his body and the mercy of his blood, and he took the price for us. And so as we enter into the time of worship, the communion table is set here. That the bread is there, the body is there for us, the blood is shed for us on our behalf because we couldn't do it on our own. We needed grace. Let's pray as the worship team comes up, and then you're free to take communion during the set and bring your offering, and God bless you the rest of this day. Father, thank you for this time. Lord, I pray that we would take serious issues of the heart. Lord, that you would guide us, you would encourage us and equip us to live out the principles that you are teaching us. Father, thank you that you showed us what it looked like first and foremost, and you continue to remind us and you continue to love us even when we make mistakes. That your mercy is fresh and new every morning, and great is your faithfulness. Amen.